when we tried to exit the building, it was so loud. People were getting right up in your face. And one of the men, just as I walked out the building personally, told me to get raped. People were actually following us home. How can these people profess to be pro-woman and pro-choice if they're actively threatening violent acts on people?
Violent mobs, threats, and police escorts. We're not talking about the Little Rock Nine or Ruby Bridges in 1960s America. No, we're talking about Manchester today. Stay tuned to find out more. Hello and welcome to another episode of About Abortion, the UK's only podcast dedicated to addressing abortion in the UK context with truth and love. Today we have the privilege of having Inge Botha on the show with us. Inge has been at the heart of the Manchester mobs, and we're going to be hearing her story in a moment. But first, guiding us through the questions and bringing profound insights, we have Tim Lewis. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Christian, and really good to meet you, Inge. Thanks for coming on.
So, Inge, can we introduce you more formally? And before we get into the meat and the controversy and the storm that you and your other students have found yourself in recently, can you just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're studying? That'd be really great.
My name is Inge-Maria Botha. My family is originally from South Africa, but we live in the southeast of England. I'm up in Manchester studying dental hygiene and therapy, and I'm first year.
And you've got first year exams coming up?
Yes, we've had most of them already, but we've got two more left to do.
Well, listen, thank you so much for carving out this time when you're in the middle of a pressure cooker, academically and pro-life wise. So we really appreciate that. And tell us about the Pro-Life Society. Tell us about your pro-life journey. Well, firstly, when did you become pro-life, and why did you want to join this society?
So, I was raised with this idea that life is precious from very young. And that's because of my Catholic upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
For a while in my teenage years, I was pretty atheist, but I still held my pro-life views. I don't know if that's because I had the foundation I did, but um, I don't know, from a scientific view, and just because there seemed to be a lot of contradictions with what people are saying, how life is precious, I kept my pro-life views. Then when I returned to the faith, I don't know, to me, pro-lifism has just made sense the whole way through my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't always been that active with it, but from my siblings' influence, they went to university and they were always talking about their pro-life societies. So the first thing I did when I got to Manchester was I looked up, is there a pro-life society already instated, which there wasn't. So when I found out George was setting one up, I was very excited and I immediately got in touch with him saying that I want to be involved. But yes, I take my hat off to George for setting it up.
Amazing. Okay, so brought up Catholic, always pro-life, went through a atheistic stage, rejecting the existence of God, but remained pro-life throughout that period. Tim, it'd be good to bring you in at this point. I mean, obviously you're the theological lead for Brephos, and would, you know, how do we ground the pro-life argument? Is it just a theological argument?
No, not at all. I mean, obviously, we probably all of us here on this conversation could come at things from a faith perspective and have certain reasons that inform, perhaps undergird, perhaps strengthen our views. And of course, the gospel accounts, don't they, begin with Jesus' life from conception, from that moment, and of course, John the Baptist's life as well within the womb. And that picks up the trajectory of the Old Testament, what we see in the Psalms and in other parts of the Old Testament that paint such a beautiful picture of the child prior to birth. But I think, scientifically, medically, there's little controversy really about when human life begins, and that's at the point of conception or fertilization. That's when, a new genetic human being comes into existence. Mm-hmm. They're very, very small at that point, but they're a member of the human family, the human race. And I think it's really interesting that in our current kind of cultural moment, we are often very concerned about the climate. We're very concerned about the natural world. We have huge amounts of protections for different members of the animal species. I think, for example, in this country, in the UK, eagle eggs are very protected in law. You can't destroy an eagle egg or perhaps other rare species of bird and the like. And yet, when it comes to the offspring of humans, within their mother's womb, it's a little bit of a free for all, up to a certain point anyway in law, and even sometimes beyond that. So there's a huge kind of contradiction. There's a huge hypocrisy, really, I think, in our thinking. Yeah, so I think we obviously come at this from a faith perspective, but I don't think you have to be a Christian. I don't think you even have to believe in God actually to recognize the value of human life, the value of people who are obviously much weaker and much more vulnerable than we are as unborn children are at that stage of gestation. And there are people who go out on CBR displays who are not Christians, who don't hold a kind of faith perspective, but they see the abhorrence of what abortion does, really. So yeah, I think we want to appeal to a broad demographic. Absolutely.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And hopefully it'll be relevant as we come back to what's been going on in Manchester and why this is universally wrong, as opposed to just a kind of, just a response to faith. Actually, this is a response also to truth. Thank you also for informing me about the eagle eggs. I heartily regret climbing a 60-foot tree and having 3 eagle eggs for breakfast this morning. So coming back to you, Inga, the Pro-Life Society. So when you got there wasn't a society. How did you meet George? Tell us a bit of the backstory, and then tell us about when did you first realize that you were agitating a hornet's nest in setting up this society?
Well, I met George through Catholic Society. He seemed like a very solid guy. Uh, so when we were setting up when he was setting up the society, it immediately blew up. Like, I don't know if you saw, it was on the media. People were saying it was a male-led society. There were people contacting George, especially with a few messages that were quite nasty.
Can you give us some more? So can you just say, was it a male-led society, or were there women central to the setting up of the society from the start?
Yes, so me and Lejoie, we joined very early on. And George and someone else, they were the main setters up. Well, they set up the society originally,
Mm,
but I mean, we were quite wary about putting our faces up on social media,
mhm,
uh, especially because for the people who are doing medical oriented courses, there has been a lot of backlash for people who have been vocal about being pro-life. So
mhm,
understandably, me and Lejoie were quite reserved in that
mhm.
aspect of it. But no, it wasn't male-led. It was just the media blowing everything out of proportion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And who was, so just to help us out. So basically, was it before you'd even filed to set up the society at the union that you were getting this opposition? When did you first realize that people were being coordinating opposition against you?
I would say we the first opposition really began to take effect when they found out that the students' union was affiliating our society. It wasn't a problem before that. It was as soon as this everyone realized that they were actually going to become a society
Mm-hmm.
that was supported by the student union. That's when people started getting a bit angry, I think.
And just before we get to the first meeting, which obviously was phenomenal, to see the backlash and the way you were being treated and appalling. What's the student union? Were they supportive? Were they giving you the thumbs up? Were they trying to discourage you? What were they like in the setting up process?
Well, yeah, they were very professional. I mean, since the Freedom of Speech Act that was recently put in place, I don't think they could really object to
Hmm.
us affiliating as a society. They were very good and they have been offering us support the whole way through.
Mm,
I don't think they realized what a big backlash we would get though,
mm,
because we were trying to get a lot of security there for the first meeting. I know we're not on that subject yet, but for the first meeting, we were trying to get a lot of security there in case, because we knew that there was going to be a protest or a demonstration elsewhere to the place we had planned. But the Students' Union didn't really take that seriously at first. So I think if that was the only thing I would complain about towards the Student Union.
Can I just very briefly come in at this point, Christian, and that's to ask a question. So obviously, as things progressed and as the society was affiliated, obviously the opposition rose and the pushback. I'm just interested to know, Inga, initially, in terms of perhaps the wider perception among your peers, your sort of fellow students, people in hall or whatever, perhaps particularly people who wouldn't call themselves pro-life, so perhaps other pro-choice students. What was the perception of perhaps you and your other fellow students as you were setting this up? Was it like, well, this is cool, we don't agree, but live and let live? Or did you find yourself really quite isolated? I guess I'm keen to know, is what we saw when the meeting happened, was this really a minority action, or is this really representative of where most Manchester students are?
Great question.
I think it depends on the course. So personally, I haven't experienced any backlash from them really. I don't know if they know. I don't know if they do or not. But no, they haven't brought it up at all. I don't know. Yeah, so they've been pretty good. But then again, my course is a medical career, so they would have to be very professional about how they demean themselves towards their colleagues. I have heard from other students who are doing different courses that there's been a few situations where they haven't really been treated very nicely by their peers. But I don't think it is majority, because one of my friends, when she found out that I was part of the society, she contacted me asking me, "Oh, are you actually part of the society?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am." And I mean, she doesn't hold the same beliefs as me, but she accepted it and she was pretty supportive of it, saying how the reaction we had at the first meeting was terrible. Because obviously there's going to be people who have different opinions to you throughout life. You can't just protest the fact that we don't agree. So I think a lot of people do realize that it is a bit of an overreaction.
That's helpful. I think the other fascinating thing you said just initially there, Inga, was about, the medical students and medical courses, because I know the sort of fitness to practice thing is a huge part of that, and it's often used as perhaps a thing to scare students with. But I realize it's real, and I know anecdotally from friends who studied medicine that not themselves, but people in their course have been thrown out for all sorts of things, actually. So for example, riots in a curry house, for example, a food fight in a curry house, that has led to students being kicked off courses. So it's quite a broad thing. But I think, to me, that's interesting because obviously currently in UK law there is still exemptions, there is still freedom of conscience clauses. As a doctor, as a nurse, as a midwife, you can say, I don't want to involve myself in any kind of abortion practices. But I think we need to be aware that those kind of freedoms could potentially down the line be under threat. But so it's really interesting that even at that stage at university, those things are. And of course, where I went to university, at Nottingham, Inga, you may know the story. A few years ago, there was a student midwife there, who was also part of the pro-life society, and she was kicked off her course for a term or two. I think she had to redo the whole year. I believe Julia was her name. Because she was part of the pro-life society and she held pro-life views, and it just takes one of her faculty lecturers took against that, and of course the university reinstated her. They recognized that they were in the wrong, but I think we're going to see increasingly these kind of things.
So Inga, let's come to the first meeting. I mean, it'll be amazing just to hear from you. We covered this on 2 occasions in this podcast already, but we haven't ever heard first-hand testimony of what it was like to be at that first meeting, what it was like to navigate these vicious crowds. What were the threats that were made? Please tell us in as much detail as you can, just what happened.
Well, when we arrived there were already massive crowds because they had found out where we were setting up the meeting.
And how big are we talking in terms of numbers here?
Hundreds, so there were a lot. Yeah, so we personally I had to squeeze through all these people. I don't think they realized I was trying to get to the meeting, luckily, because they would just move out your way. But we went in, we started the meeting. People were throwing eggs at the building, uh, blasting loud music on speakers, and they were shouting like very loud, so loud that your ears are ringing.
Mm.
Like I've never heard anything so loud, and I've got baby siblings.
Mm.
Um, yes, so we had to change rooms as well because uh, the security thought that it may be less disruptive if we moved up higher in the building.
Mm.
They managed to get into one room and they were shouting very odd slogans. I think it was keep your rosaries off our ovaries, but it was four males. There was one lady. It was four males, and they were chanting this. So we had to move rooms again, and then
Mm.
we finished the meeting in peace. And I actually thought that the crowds were gone by the end of it because they'd gone quiet. But when we tried to exit the building, it was so loud. People were getting right up in your face, yelling at you,
Mm.
um, like blocking the way of even the policemen. Uh, and one of the men, just as I walked out the building personally, told me to get raped. Um,
Awful.
like very loud and like so close to my face. I mean, I've heard some people saying that he was trying to make an argument, but if you're that close to someone's face so much that you can feel their breath on your skin, that's not an argument.
Mm.
Uh, so yes, the police escorted us away, and people were actually following us home. It was pretty terrifying.
Sorry, as a young lady, what was going through your head?
Well, I mean, the main thing was how how can these people profess to be pro-woman and pro-choice if they're actively threatening violent acts on people? Uh, I don't know. It just shows the backwardness of their arguments because they say they're pro-woman and pro-choice, but then they're advocating and trying to weaponize sexual assault against people who
Mm.
don't agree with them, and especially coming from a man who is apparently not meant to have a say on the entire. So they're just going back on their own arguments.
Mm.
That's what was going through my head, and it was quite
Hypocrisy is
sad.
stunning, isn't it? Yeah. I was just going to say very quickly, Inge, the folks, because I've seen some of the footage, and I don't know at what stage, whether this was pre the meeting, post the meeting, or whether the whole thing kind of rumbled on and became a bit dispersed. But some of the people I saw there, I would guess that were not necessarily of student age or not typical student age. Were these all students from Manchester, or was it a bit of a renter mob? Were people get wind of this and kind of come in from the city who were obviously the pro-abortion crowd? What's your take on that?
I don't think many of them were from the University of Manchester personally, just because I
Okay.
walk campus almost every day and I've never seen those faces before.
Hmm.
Some of them definitely were, but it looked like a real mixture. And also, yeah, you're right, the ages didn't match up with the university
Wow.
age.
So we're talking about a full-on kind of rent a mob pile on. The word goes round, and just everyone with an axe to grind, who wants maybe want up for a bit of a confrontation, bit of a fight, kind of zeroes in on your society meeting. Gosh, terrifying.
Well, and this raises the question. I mean, what has been the response? Firstly, of the society. I know some people were really shaken by the event. Did anyone leave the society as a result? Has it actually blocked some people from expressing their conscience as a result of this? And then I'd love to ask what the response of the police and the university was as well.
Well, no one left the society because of the riots or anything. I think it only grew because it gave us quite a lot of publicity in the media. I know that in the event there was one pregnant lady who had to leave the event early just because the crowds were getting more and more, and it was she was fearing for her child. Um, yeah, the police response was very good because originally they weren't meant to be at the event, but because there were so many crowds, security called them in, and uh, they did a lot of efforts to keep us safe from the crowds and escorting us away from them as much as possible and keeping the crowds away from us.
Mm.
So yeah, the police are very good. The university's response to it, they did offer a lot of support and told us what to do for our safety. But I mean, I don't know how true it is, but apparently, according to the group uh, that organized the protests, they are working with the students' union as well. So I don't. It's kind of giving a bit of a mixed message if that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm not sure. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they could just be saying that.
But I mean, for example, even those of us who hold to a free speech, laws, we still accept that there is a transgression from free speech to non-free speech when you are inciting violence and harm, etc. Right? That's no longer free speech. That's the incitement of violence, which in of itself is a crime. Did this threat, get raped, which clearly wasn't an argument. Not many arguments are 2 words long, and also not shouted in your face. Did the police do anything at the time? Has there been any talk of pressing charges there? Has there been any acknowledgement that actually this is not an expression of free speech, that this is harassment and intimidation?
Well, I mean, when it actually happened, the police, I don't know if you can see in the videos, but the police were towards the front of the group,
Mm,
and me and this other girl were right at the back. So it wasn't caught on camera. I did file a report to the police
mm,
on the previous day or the next day on the Saturday. And they said that is sexual harassment. And they did look into it, but there's no CCTV footage, so they can't really take it further. And also, I wasn't looking at the guy's face at all because I didn't want to give him eye contact. So
yeah, yeah, that's understandable.
in the street.
I think this is, again, we've talked a little bit about the inconsistencies and the hypocrisy of our culture and laws vis-a-vis abortion, etc. But I think this is, a real case in point, because we have recently in this country passed this legislation about the so-called buffer zones around abortion facilities, whereby people peacefully offering help, advice, information, um, contact details, of other sort of pregnancy help centres and the like, are no longer allowed in these buffer zones. So we're talking about a kind of restricted area around these abortion centres, to the extent, and I'm sure folks are aware of this, to the extent that people have been arrested for actually just being in these areas and praying silently, so not even with a placard, not even with a sign, but simply praying outside of these places. So, and Isabel Vaughan Spruce and others have been arrested. So on the one hand, we've got a situation where you can't stand somewhere in silence praying. That is seen as so hostile, so intimidatory, that it simply cannot happen, and laws have been passed to sort of ban it. And then on the other hand, we have actual, anyone who has seen that footage, whatever their beliefs on the rights or wrongs of abortion, no one's seeing that footage of a mob screaming, hurling all kinds of vile abuse with obscene language on placards, and shouting the kind of things that Inga's just told us have been shouted at her. no one can deny that that has crossed the line from free speech into harassment, into intimidation,
Mm.
uh, into sort of verbal assault. And yet, how many arrests were made here? So it's this complete hypocrisy that we've got going on. And it's like, the emperor's got no place, but we just can't see it. So I think it's really important to keep kind of banging that drum, because there is just, there's such a mismatch here between situations like this where there's real harassment, real intimidation, people throwing eggs and threatening violence, threatening sexual violence, and then the kind of peaceful presence. No one has ever been arrested for harassment outside an abortion centre, certainly from the pro-life side. Often the pro-choice
Mm.
folks get quite verbal, get quite aggressive, but no one from the pro-life side has ever been arrested in the UK outside one of these places. And yet the government, in their wisdom, have seen fit to pass laws banning any offer of help, support, advice. And yet this kind of renter mob, these kind of thugs, this kind of behaviour carries on, and I think has the potential to keep carrying on until clear action is taken, really,
Yeah.
partly from the university, but I think also from the authorities, from the police and the like. So I just thought it was really important to say. Sorry to kind of interrupt there.
No, don't, you didn't interrupt at all. Inka, were you going to say something?
No, I just completely agree. It's complete double standard. It's absolutely incredible that people don't see it.
Well, I mean, what do we think it is? What do we think it is that that makes, what do we think is going on a deeper level that makes the even to be bodily present, even if it's praying in your head, that is somehow deemed harassment and intimidation, and is being banned nationwide, pending, the discussion on prayer. That's the consultation is still rumbling on, or the analysis of the consultation is rumbling on, with, somebody, coming up into Inga's face, threatening, saying get raped, and that's somehow free speech. What is it? What Help us understand what's going on a deeper level there. That one is permissible and the other is literally illegal.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. There's probably a number of factors that go into it. I mean, one of them may be that one pricks the conscience and the other is more intimidatory, and people find the pricking of one's conscience scarier than being intimidated. I don't know if that does that make sense.
Yeah, it does.
And also, I mean, obviously, pro-lifeism isn't just based on religion, but I think there is a lot of hatred towards religion nowadays. Um, I mean, I know that an example would be there's a movie that's just come out. I don't know what it's called, but it sounds absolutely irreverent towards religion. Um, and at the end of it, apparently there is like the movie's about a pregnant mother and she ends up killing her baby once the baby is born.
Mm.
Um, and it's also very tied into religion. I just think the whole basis is absolutely irreverent.
Mm.
Um, but I heard it from one of my colleagues talking about it, and one of the girls she was talking to asked why would she kill the baby, and then she said, "Oh well, she doesn't want it. Um, I would do the same thing." And this is bearing in mind this is a I know it's a movie, but this is a already born child.
Mm.
So I just think the fact that we don't see the unborn as people is carrying on into post being born already.
Mm.
Um, so I don't know. I think that's a bit of a tangent, but I think the people are scared of religion nowadays, and they think it's oppressive, and that is the reason why it is forbidden to pray outside abortion
Mm.
clinics.
I think that's
I think there's
profound.
definitely. I think, yeah, I do, and I think Inga's put the sort of finger on it with the thing about pricking the conscience, really. yeah, I think that is exactly right. I think because I think however loudly people scream and shout and stuff, I think, you know, deep down that there is in all of us a realization that these aren't just blobs of tissue or clumps of cells. These are human lives. They are in the state that we were all in once upon a time. Everyone who's now around has gone through that stage of gestation in the womb, um, hasn't been aborted. Everyone who's promoting abortion has never themselves been aborted. Um, and I think deep down we can't deny the fact that we know that to be the case. And you know, again, if you take it back to the New Testament talks a lot about suppressing the truth, and that is what humankind in its fallen state does. We suppress the truth, and we don't want to hear the truth really because it is too painful, because it exposes the idols, I think, of our own heart. It exposes the sins that we need to repent of to be reconciled with our Creator. But I think it happens that abortion is one of these societally acceptable sins where so many of these kind of idols of our culture kind of coalesce. So we're talking about bodily autonomy, whatever that means. We're talking about sexual freedom. We're talking about a sort of a desire not to be judged by anyone or any higher being, albeit while being very judgmental and intolerant ourselves. So I think, yeah, I think we see abortion really as it challenges the gods of our age. Or sorry, yeah, abortion is so protected, I think, because to challenge abortion is to challenge so many of the kind of sundry gods and idols of our age, really, and people don't like it. And to pick up just very briefly on some of the chants that Inga mentioned, I mean, this kind of nonsense, keep your rosaries off our ovaries, which was obviously ironically being chanted mainly by four blokes. I think it's almost like these people think we're living in some kind of mashup of the Afghan Taliban, of the Handmaid's Tale, and the Spanish Inquisition. You know, this is almost the picture they're painting for us. The reality is more children were aborted last year than ever before in the UK, and the figure will probably rise again this year. So that's the reality, not the kind of fantasy that they're, you know, talking about. And also, they don't really understand what abortion is, what abortion does. This people are against abortion. People are pro-life because they recognise that more than one body, more than one human being is involved. You know, it's never just my body, my choice. It's never just a woman's body that's affected. This is about the body of the growing child. As I say, in a state that we were all in once. Every abortion takes the life of another human being. So the chant, like so much of the abortion industry, is a smokescreen. It's completely dishonest. But yeah, it's as these chants are, they're fairly moronic and they don't have much argument behind them. It's easier to chant this rubbish than actually engage in a reasoned dialogue, isn't it? So often, but
well, I think
yeah.
I'm gonna one up you. I think it's not moronic so much as it is demonic, right? And I'm gonna back this up. You know, you can't just say stuff like that. But when we did a campaign to educate on the humanity and value of unborn children and the reality of abortion in Ireland before their referendum, you know, we saw the same kind of manifestations of madness and threats and screaming in your face. This kind of this outpouring of kind of hatred and vitriol and wrongly identified victim narratives, right? But they were chanting not the church, not the state. You know, women should decide their fate. And what I found curious about this, about the Manchester thing, is they were chanting "F the church, F the state." You know, let women decide their fate. And there seems to me to be this escalation in hatred. You know, and even it wasn't just the pro-life society. The way they were treating the police was with no respect for authority. They were swearing at the police. I'm surprised the police didn't make arrests. I think they could have legally made a number of arrests of people on the night. But they were in kind of free speech mode and they were kind of absorbing what I would deem to be at least some people's criminal activity. And I actually think Inga hit the nail on the head with this whole dislike of God and hatred against God. I was reading this morning, and David Brennan, if he was on this podcast, he loves to apply a well-chosen Bible verse. So I'm going to attempt to do the same. But Colossians 3 says this. It says, "Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator." Let me say that last bit again, which is put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge in the image of its creator. Which is, there is this sense in which we throw off the lies. We don't lie to each other. Let's stop lying about what abortion is, what abortion does, what effect it has on people. And we take up the new self, which is we take up a truthful lifestyle, which is in knowledge, it's in truth. But as we do so, we start reflecting the image of our creator. And I think the heart of the hatred, the tip of the needle here is the image of God. It's the hatred of the image of God, not only in the babies that are being killed in their hundreds of thousands each year, which we know Psalm 139 bear the image of God, but it's actually when God's people start advocating for the babies and advocating for truth, they themselves become renewed in the image of God, and they therefore also become the target of all of this hatred. And I think that, to me, that seems to be my analysis of what's going on, which is why these pro-lifers, it's fair game. It's fair game to treat them degradingly, harass them, intimidate them, smash them with incredibly unjust and substantiated claims of harassment and intimidation when they're not, whilst also tolerating that behavior towards them. It's an utter hatred of the image of God wherever it is seen, and that's why we make no apologies for talking about the scripture and inciting God, because I think we're not the first people. Read Peter Hitchens' Rage Against God. The whole a lot of the radical left wing stuff at its heart is angry towards God. It hates God, and it seeks to replicate or tries to reimagine society without God to such disastrous effects. And I think whilst this can all be concealed in fluffy language and political talk, it's moments like this in Manchester where you just see the bare face, the raw hatred coming out so clearly. Inge, it would be lovely to move on just to the second meeting. So I know Madeline Page from is it called the Alliance of
Pro-life students.
yeah, the Alliance of Pro-Life Students, AP. I'm really dyslexic when it comes to anagrams. Alliance of Pro-Life Students, APLS. That you organized a second meeting. Madeline was going to be on this podcast this week. Unfortunately, she had other stuff that she had to attend to. What was it like, the second meeting? Who came? We'd love to get an inside scoop of what happened.
So a lot of the people who came to the last meeting and people, like new people, came to the meeting. And Madeline made her way quite early with her own broadcasting team as well, just in case the protests did say anything inflammatory towards her. Yeah, and a few pro-choicers came, like 8 or 9 of them, I think. I'm very bad with gauging numbers, but there were quite a few. And there was pretty good discussion going on. Obviously, there were a few people and a few questions that were deliberately trying to get Madeline to say something they could twist. But no, she was very good at. I think she was very good at arguing for pro-lifism and the whole idea of it. Yeah. So I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure one of the pro-choicers who came was, I think she's a big leader of the protest group.
Mm.
And she was the one who did have a few inflammatory questions for Madeline.
Mm.
But in the end, it ended on a nice note where we Madeline just reaffirmed that she was there to help not only the baby but also the woman who was involved in the abortion. And so the pro-choicers kind of relented and said, well, they also just want what's best for the woman. So it did end on a nice high note until we walked outside, and then there was quite a big protest again. It wasn't as big because it was raining, and also it wasn't as scary because they all had their little umbrellas up. But yeah, it wasn't too bad compared to the last one. But then again, I don't know. I don't know if that's just us getting used to it, or
Mm.
because it shouldn't be happening at all. I don't I don't see why we should have to put up with huge protests when imagine if it was the other way around.
Mm.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any other? Can you imagine any other society or the political interest, religious, or anything else that would generate this kind of hatred and antagonism? And I just think it's fascinating because that pro-choice, pro-abortion leader, whatever she described herself as, you know, she must be thinking there must be a little bit of her thinking. Well, I've tried to come and argue my case with these people, put my case forward, and then I walk out the door and there's just people screaming and shouting obscenities, all the rest of it. There must be a little bit of a thinking, and Christian, you alluded to this in the last podcast, that this is not great for their side of things. This is not great for their cause if they're consistently being
Mm.
represented by and associated by buggery and mobs, really screaming vile abuse. It's not a good look. The optics are not so good.
Mm. Well, I don't know. It depends on their audience because obviously I have heard some people who are pro-choice and they don't agree with the mob at all. But I know they have a lot of supporters as well. So I don't know. Might work in
Yeah.
their favor.
And two final questions for you, Inga. What is where from here? What's next for the Manchester Pro-Life Society? Are you bowed? Are you intimidated? What are you going to what's the plan moving forward?
Well, we're going to continue to have events and we're probably going to have them in the same building every time just because there's only two exits, so it's quite easy to guard. No, we're not intimidated. If anything, uh, I mean, if history has taught us anything, it's that oppression just makes things grow and has a lot of it gets you a lot of supporters. So we're not intimidated at all. I mean, it's
Mm.
just playground tactics. We wouldn't mind if people were wanting to debate. That would be different. So I don't think we need to entertain. Um, I don't think we need to entertain the thought of being intimidated by them. Just
Mm.
carry on.
No, quite right. Stand your ground. And I think, I mean, I don't know again what your meetings like or whatever, but I don't think if you're having weekly, fortnightly meetings, I don't actually think they're going to keep this up over the
No.
course of a month, a term, a year, a decade. I think it's stirred the hornet's nest, as Christian said, and it's brought some stuff to the surface. And I think there's probably, as we've hinted at, spiritual battles going on as well as just people's antagonism. But I think ultimately, I don't think they're going to be able to sustain that. And I think you are affiliated to the student union now. That those laws are protected under UK law of freedom of expression. So I think you guys are in the right. And I do hope things calm down because it's not nice, it's not pleasant to have that kind of week in week out at all. And I really feel for you, but you know do stand your ground, do fight the good fight, and do please keep going with our encouragement, our love and prayers, because we are right behind you really in this.
So the final question, Inga, is the About Abortion podcast has a regular listenership in the hundreds. On some weeks, we have over 1,000 people tuning into our podcast. For those people listening in, what can we be doing to help and support the Manchester Pro-Life Society?
Well, I think just if you are pro-life, just making sure you speak out when you need to, and not being afraid to, even if people do have opposing opinions and may demonize you for it. I think that's the best way to support any pro-life group, really. Yeah, and praying for us would be great so that we can continue for the next few years. And also that the protests die down, because it will be nice to not have them around anymore.
And can I ask who will be leading the society next year?
So I'll be in the president's chair, and there's 4 other people who will be leading as well in the committee next year.
Amazing. Well, hopefully that will take at least one objection out of the arsenal of your enemy, who seem to think that this is a male-led society. But Inge, we're so grateful to have you on the call. We really appreciate your time and what you're doing in Manchester, and we will certainly be praying for you. That the Manchester Pro-Life Society continues to make history and expose just how hateful the core of the argument is for abortion, both for the babies, both for the mothers, for society, and at this moment being focused on the people daring just to point out the truth. And so God bless you. Keep up what you're doing, and please come back and update us frequently as to how you're getting on.